with the story of when they were in quarantine after they came back from the moon, right? He and Shepard were sitting there, eating breakfast, waiting, and Shepard, a story broke that Mitchell had done some ESP experiments on the way back from the moon. And Shepard said to him, look at this nonsense. The newspapers will do anything to make a buck. And Mitchell said, I did that. I actually did that.
Well, what experiments?
So he was doing ESP experiments on the way back from the moon. He had a psychic in Chicago, a Swedish psychic, that he was sending messages to.
Was she hot?
It was an old Swedish man, right?
Okay.
I don't think, named Olaf, right?
But I hear Swedish psychic.
Right?
Yeah, I gotta get to my psychic. Can't wait to take my clothes off.
No. No, I'll introduce you to Olaf.
Okay,
right?
okay. I saw the movie Frozen.
I didn't see that one.
Olaf's the little snowman.
I didn't. Oh, you got younger kids.
Yeah.
I missed that one. Mine are older.
Anyway, sorry. So Ed Mitchell was talking to this hot chick in
the hot old man in and the story broke because the Swedish psychic could not resist leaking to the press that he had done these experiments.
What experiments were they?
Well, psychics train on these little cards called Zener cards, right? So you have different symbols on them, and one person. That's how they decide whether or not they're being psychic. There would be a veil between us, and I would say, "What are you seeing?" Right, and you would call it out. So it's like a control system. And Mitchell had these items with him on the way to the moon, and did these experiments to try to see whether you could have a psychic connection with someone back on Earth. I mean, that was.
Did it work?
Well, no. And he took notes. He showed me the notes. It was so wild to be at his house in Florida, and he pulls out this old spiral notebook with water stains on it that actually went to the moon. I was like, wow, this is really something else. I mean, it was one of those moments in time where you're just like, I don't know, there was a feeling of sadness around all of it with Ed Mitchell sitting there in his his chair and talking to me about what it was like to be an Apollo astronaut. On the walls, I'm with a lot of these sources with incredible amounts of awards on the walls. But what does that mean after time passes, right?
So his experiments didn't work, but he still believed in psychic powers.
Yes. I mean, so what we were saying, he was ridiculed, and he had such a tough time with it. And so the people who propped him up and the people who gave him a lot of encouragement had sort of more radical ideas as he grew older. And
Who
I
are these
think
people?
Conspiracy theorists who really kind of used him because he was an Apollo astronaut. And so he was so much more famous than any of them would ever be. And they really took advantage of him, I think.
So you think they manipulated him with information and tried to get him more and more enthusiastic about their
I mean, it's speculation
obsessions?
on my part, but you kind of go where the love is, right?
He was an older guy, too.
Yeah.
And I'd seen some interviews with him as he was getting older and older, and he seemed to be having some difficulties, thinking about things clearly.
And people take advantage of that.
Yeah, he was really obsessed with extraterrestrial life. It was really interesting because didn't he claim that he had seen something while he was up in space?
I think people helped him make that claim. That was my understanding of it, of reporting it. I mean, I stayed away from some of the crazier speculative things about him because what I was really interested in when I was writing that book was how his authority and power allowed the program to get funding, right? Because so much of this it's who's funding this stuff and why? And it really does come down to authority, which is always a narrative that I find fascinating, right? How do people get the authority to say go on these programs, or we should do that? I mean, the question you asked of who's in charge, right?
Right.
And in all of this, what I learned more than anything is that the office of the president has a lot more power than I think any of us are aware.
Oh, I'm sure. What did you find anything about Ed Mitchell? Did he say anything about see if he said anything about seeing a UFO or seeing extraterrestrial life? But the problem is if he believes that, boy, if he was talked into saying that, you got to wonder about a lot of the other things that he said as well. The other thing is, as these guys get older, that becomes their career. Their career becomes discussing their experiences. And the more outrageous those experiences are, the better the career is.
It's absolutely true.
They change their stories. You know, like Michael Collins changed his story. His story when he just got back from the moon, excuse me, when he just got back from the moon, his story was that they couldn't see any stars. But then as he got older, he wrote in depth in his book, and I think it was in the 90s, you know, decades later, how vivid the stars were and how incredible it was out there with no atmosphere. But there's a press conference when he came back from the moon, right after the Apollo 11 moon launch. He was talking about he couldn't see any stars. So everybody's like, well, what is it? They get lost, right? They're older. It's been so many years since whatever they did when they were working with NASA. And really, it becomes, that's their focal point of attention. Like where they get their attention from and where they make their career is from their attention. And so they start telling these inconsistent stories.
I mean, one of the great perils of, living on your laurels is exactly that. And it's why, I mean, like a guy like Billy Waugh, I was so intrigued by that he was constantly reinventing his own role within the CIA as he talked to me about at length, because he never wanted to just become one of those has-beens, right? So his cover later became Just Another Old Man, which is like super interesting. Like he was in Sudan in the 90s, and he actually took the first reconnaissance photographs of Osama bin Laden before bin Laden was on anybody's radar except for the CIA's. And how do you run, he said to me, how do you run around Sudan, which is a country made up of like really tall black Dinka tribesmen, if you're a 5'8" old white guy who's 72, supposed to get reconnaissance photographs of bin Laden, right?
What did he do? Like wear golf shirts? And
I have a photograph of him. He wore like, those socks like that go all the way up to your mid-shin.
He dressed like a dork. Yeah.
Yes, and little shorts and a sweatband over his head. And he said, my cover was that I was an old man on a fitness craze. And there he is running around Sudan. I mean, there's no sidewalks, right? And he's just jogging away. And he said bin Laden's dogs used to come after him. And so he would have to run with a lead pipe.
What?
And he would whack the dogs on the nose, and he said, they stopped coming after me.